Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Leaders Podcast, part of the Jobs with Impact compendium of resources for people who want to make a positive impact on the world. I'm David Rosenheim, your host. Every episode, we bring you in-depth conversations with people who are leading the way to a sustainable future. I hope these conversations will be as inspiring to you as they are to me. And most of all, I hope that they'll empower you to take action. The planet needs you. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to jobswithimpact.com. Please help us to spread the word by taking a minute to rate and review the show in iTunes and by telling your friends and colleagues. Hi friends, this week I went to Chicago and had the chance to circle up with old friends Doug Scott and Ann McCabe, both former commissioners of the Illinois Commerce Commission and also former directors of the board of the Climate Registry, my alma mater. We met at NRDC's office above the Lyric Opera, and I thought it would be fun to record our three-way conversation. Ann McCabe took over my role as executive director of the Climate Registry when I left in 2017. She has an impressive background in the energy sector. She chaired the subcommittee on nuclear issues for NARUC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, while also serving on the ICC. And before that, she held a variety of roles in the Illinois Governor's Office on energy and environmental issues. She's a well-known expert on grid modernization, energy efficiency, and nuclear energy. I met Doug Scott in 2011 when, as chair of the ICC and also the Climate Registry, he hired me to run the latter. He's had a remarkable career, heading not only the Illinois Commerce Commission, but also the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and serving in the Illinois legislature and as the mayor of Rockford, Illinois. He's now with the Great Plains Institute, where Doug convenes states across the Midwest and beyond on issues ranging from energy efficiency, electricity sector decarbonization, and carbon sequestration and storage. Well, Ann McCabe and Doug Scott, so good to be with you guys again. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you, David.
Thank you.
So since we're doing a dual interview, and as we were talking before, there's a reason for doing this. We three have a shared history, and certainly the two of you have a shared history in the energy and climate sector here in Illinois. So we'll get to that. But first, Doug, I'd like to start with you and talk about your early beginnings. I know you're from Rockford.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about growing up there, what your parents did, what childhood was like for you.
It's a great place to grow up. My dad was a decorating contractor, painter, did houses and businesses and things like that. And Mom was an x-ray technician. So both parents worked. School was great. I enjoyed it, growing up, and got interested in things like environmental issues then, but that came a little bit later. Although, when I was in grade school, we had the first Earth Day and the passage of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. So, those are things that we followed current events and politics a lot in my household. We talked about the news and we talked about events. And so those were things that I was aware of at the time, but my interest deepened in that, later on.
So where did your interest in politics come about? Because you majored in poli-sci. Had you been interested in high school, or did that come about when you were at University of Tulsa?
At a young age, interested in politics from the time I can remember. I can actually remember watching election returns when I was 4 years old. I can actually remember watching the presidential election returns. Like I said, we talked about those things all the time. Nobody in my family was a political person. Nobody had a job that involved politics or ran for office or anything. But my mom and my grandma both volunteered for campaigns. They talked about those issues a lot. And so it was something that, and we all, around the dinner table, around, watching news, other things, in my family, we always talked about those issues. So politics was ingrained in me from a very early age.
And you studied it as an undergraduate?
Studied it as an undergrad at University of Tulsa, and really learned a lot. I had some great professors there that talked about, kind of how we got to where we're at, and politically and historically, and really a great education there from a political science standpoint.
And you went on to study law at Marquette?
I did. That was always kind of the plan. I always thought about being a lawyer. I did when I was a little kid, when people would ask me, what do you want to do? When I realized that sports were not going to be part of my ability to do that professionally, then I wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to do something in government. I wanted to do something in politics and government, and got pretty lucky, was able to do all that at a fairly young age.
We'll get to some of that in a second, but we have to take an aside and talk about baseball. So did you play baseball
I
growing
did.
up?
I played baseball and basketball mostly growing up and through high school.
Okay.
And that's kind of when, my desire was exceeding my talent at that point. So
Right.
I still played things like softball and pickup basketball and everything, up through my late 50s. So, but
And I know you live in a divided house, a Cubs Brewers house.
yeah. Although we're pretty good about it with each other. We root for our own teams. We root for the others' teams, except when they're playing each other. So, but we're actually, a year like last year was the best year for us when both the Cubs and Brewers made the playoffs. That was fun for us. We enjoyed that.
Great. So you served in the Illinois State Assembly. That was your entry to politics, first office that you held.
Yeah.
Tell me just a little bit about that process. And was that fairly directly out of law school, or?
No, I worked for almost 10 years as an attorney for the city of Rockford. So I was involved with the political people and the processes there at a local government level. It was a great job. Learned a whole lot there. And decided to run. Actually, the first office I ran for was county executive, county board chairman in Winnebago County, Illinois. Lost that race in '92, and then unfortunately, our longtime House member, the longest serving member of the Illinois House, passed away in 1993, and so there were a group of people that wanted me to run for that as well, and I did, and was successful there, and so I'd been 10 years out of law school almost by the time I went to the General Assembly, but I was 35 when I went there.
And to what extent was energy and environment sort of in your consciousness? Was it a legislative priority for you?
It was. When I started working with the city, almost by accident, you have that line on your job description that says performs any related work as required. And part of my job as being a city attorney in Rockford was also to be responsible for all the solid waste management. And we started the recycling program in Rockford. And so those issues became very top of mind. So working on Superfund cases and doing a lot of other things that involved energy and environment when I was actually at the city. So when I went to the legislature, I got on the Energy and Environment Committee as a freshman legislator and stayed on there for the terms I was there. Then I also got appointed very early on to be on the special House Senate committee that was looking at redoing our energy laws to make Illinois a competitive state, a competitive retail state. And so I spent 2 years on that committee doing that. And so that really cemented in terms of, I was always kind of interested in the environmental issues, but in terms of the energy issues, that's really what got me going.
Brought them together. And you were in the freshman class with Barack Obama, right?
He came a little bit later than I did, to the Senate, but I served with him for a number of years, me in the House and he in the Senate, but knew him there. And I think we did a couple bills together and things like that. Yeah.
So you served in the House for 6 years?
6 years, and then I had just won election to my fourth term when I got elected mayor of Rockford. So I went back to municipal government for 4 years.
What prompted that change? Obviously, you had roots in Rockford government.
I did, and so a lot of the people, the mayor that I had worked for 12 years, first as an attorney, he had been the legal director, and then he moved up and ran for mayor and won. So I had worked for him for about 12 years. He was retiring. And he and others encouraged me to come back and run for that position, and I did. And so it was a great job. And I also I didn't dislike the legislature. In fact, I liked it a lot. But the idea of being able to do some things administratively and do some things where you can actually make decisions about, well, we're going to try this or we'd like to do this. That had some appeal to me. It still does. I've had both the legislative job and several administrative jobs now, and being in the position to be able to try some things, have some successes, make some mistakes, fail at some things, but the ability to try to influence policy in a much more direct way was pretty appealing to me.
Were there any big environmental agenda that you pushed through while you were mayor?
Well, not so much when I was mayor. I'd done a lot before working we started the recycling program, as I mentioned, and then we had a huge Superfund case that involved, I think it was several square miles of the southeastern part of Rockford, which had been a very industrial, still is a very industrial area. And to have that much of your city under a Superfund cloud was very damaging to trying to do economic development and other things. And so the city, me only playing a partial role, the Mayor Box at the time and the legal director at the time, really worked on a major Superfund effort that really is, having looked at a lot of them before and since, fairly unique in the way that they put together a response so that kind of voluntary settlement that involved getting a whole bunch of people hooked up to city water, and working with the businesses that were there in a way to try to take care of the problem, but still limit their exposure, what they might have under Superfund, and take that cloud off the city. So that was a huge project. And although I wasn't doing a lot of the work, I did some, but I was, just watching that was pretty amazing and been pretty good to see. So again, it helps build that idea that, wow, here's something we can actually, you can actually do that makes a huge difference in a ton of people's lives in a community. So that was pretty neat.
How big of a city is Rockford?
150,000.
It's just a good mid-sized city.
Yeah.
What were there any sort of leadership principles, or things that you learned about administration that were formed at that time that you were able to take into your career?
I learned a lot working there. I learned a lot about how decisions get made, the kind of information that you want to have. And then once you make decisions, trying to go forward with them and admitting when you've made a mistake and being willing to try something else and not doubling down because you're afraid that, you're going to look bad or something, but actually try to correct the problems that were there. I was very lucky. I worked for some really great people. I worked with some really great people in Rockford, and both the time before I came back as mayor and then when I was mayor. And so it was a great experience.
So after Rockford, you went on to head the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency.
I did, yeah. I didn't know it at the time, but Director Cipriano, who had led the agency for a number of years, was going to be leaving. Nobody knew that, but Governor Blagojevich, right after I had lost re-election for Rockford mayor in April of 2005, and the governor called me. We'd been friends in the legislature, and he called me and said, well, why don't you come work for me? And so we talked about different positions that might be available. And then he brought out the EPA, and I thought that was fantastic. I didn't know it was open, but it was fantastic because it fit right into a lot of the work that I'd done before. And by doing all of the work with recycling and being part of the State Recycling Association and seeing what was going on nationally, I worked up a lot of knowledge and interest in environmental issues. And in the energy issues as well, from having been in the legislature. So I was pretty excited when that opportunity was out there, and it turned out to be a great job.
To what extent was climate change a focus?
It was big. When early on in my tenure there, we governor asked to put together a climate change advisory group that I chaired. We brought in some professional facilitators to help us with that process, and brought in stakeholders from as diverse a range of stakeholders as we could find. Came up with 20 something, can't remember the exact number now, but 20 something recommendations as to how to reverse greenhouse gas emissions, and most of them were. A good many of them have been adopted over time by the legislature and through regulatory processes. So that was great too, because that that also gave me the opportunity to see on a really wide ranging basis what everybody's thoughts were about those particular issues. And then we also, implemented a lot of things with criteria pollutants too. Some things to reduce sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and mercury, in conjunction with some federal laws that were there. And that also led me to a broader understanding of things like how PJM works, because we were talking about, whether what we were doing was going to cause plants to close, and if so, what would be the impact on the energy supply in the area. So,
could you just
really
define PJM?
Oh, PJM it stands for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. It is a grid operator that operates the electric grid in 15 states plus the District of Columbia. So everything from Illinois going east through the Mid-Atlantic region.
Mm-hmm. And was climate change at that time as politicized as it later became? Had that really started in what is it, 2005, 2006 time frame?
Yes and no. I mean, everything's gotten more politicized, and
Sure.
I think. I mean, my own sense of that is, but there's been kind of a slow evolution of that. I mean, when you look back at the original, Clean Air, Clean Water Act, that was Republican administration and a lot of Republicans in Congress that pushed that through and believed in it. Those weren't really political issues. I think that started changing around the times of Kyoto and the Kyoto Protocol, because I can remember being in the legislature when that happened, and it was like, we'll never sign on to this, and because there's heavy coal interest in central and southern Illinois, and so politically to do a resolution, it didn't mean much, that the state of Illinois was against the Kyoto Protocol, but that was a pretty good sign that the politics of it were starting to change a little bit. Part of it was greenhouse gases were always tougher, and still are to this day, to talk to people about than bad air that they can see, or something in their rivers that's bad,
kids' lungs.
That they can see, that they know is affecting them on a daily basis. Or if people are told, like we were talking about with the Superfund in Rockford, that there's these horrible toxics that are getting into your well from where you get your water. Okay, those are things climate change has always been a little harder. It's getting better now over time.
It's getting better because it's getting worse.
Well, yeah. But just as time has gone on too, people seem to understand, what's at stake and what's happening more so than they did before. But the politics of it have gotten worse, so it's to the point now where it's just really difficult to expect things to happen in Congress, almost no matter who, which administration is in. And if that's the case, then you're going to see, and are seeing, a lot more action at the state and local level.
Yes, and there's some very positive things happening in Illinois, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. So sure. I want to switch before we move on in your career and start at the beginning of your story, Anne. And I know that you're from Columbus, Ohio. Tell me what it was like growing up there, what your kind of origin story was.
Well, I was born and raised in Columbus, and my father was a dentist who died when I was 15. I'm the oldest of four, in a plane crash. And my mother then took over his dental lab for a while. Just Columbus is a great place. It's one of the few cities I know that's really blossomed, although that blossoming includes a lot of sprawl now in the last 20 or so years. So,
did you have a sense of environment? What was your relationship to nature growing up?
Learning how to grow and trim rose bushes. My father was a big fan of roses, and Columbus has a beautiful rose garden. But I would say did not do a lot outdoors other than sports, and just thinking about what your questions about to Doug about poli-sci. I had a teacher in high school who really made political science come to life. We read a lot of primary materials, Rousseau, Locke, and others, and that's why I became a poli-sci major in college.
At Williams.
Yes.
And what was that experience for you like? How did that political training, or poli-sci training, I should say, shape your ideology or your worldview?
I wouldn't say it, probably going to school in the East shaped my worldview in Massachusetts. But it did lead me to Chicago because my faculty advisor told me about the public policy program that had started at University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in what I think was the second full year of the program. And so that was, led me to my time in state government and onward. So
talk a little bit about what a public policy degree is like. I get asked sometimes by people who are finishing college and are interested in working on environment and are considering law versus public policy. And I'm interested to know kind of what actually goes into that course of study and what it prepares you for.
Great. Well, I think public policy, public administration, masters are much more popular and better understood than they were when I graduated. My mother was still asking me if I didn't want to go to law school when I graduated. And I said no. I'd taken a couple of pre-law classes. But it gives you grounding in statistics, economics, evaluation skills, as well as some of the policy issues. So it's a really good basis for doing almost anything. And that's what I tell the grad students. I've been a mentor much of the time since I graduated. I tell them that you can do almost anything with that degree. It's very versatile.
And so you went from there into state of Illinois government as a policy analyst, if I'm getting this right.
Budget analyst.
So was this for the governor or for the Commerce Commission? Or I know you worked at
it was
both,
the
really.
governor's budget office, but the Illinois Commerce Commission was one of my agencies, along with Department of Conservation and Water Resources. So in true agency capture fashion, some friends at the Commerce Commission said, "Hey, Ann, why don't you come over here?" So after being a budget analyst, I was commissioner's assistant at the Commerce Commission. And then the gentleman who had been the chairman who hired me, Phil O'Connor, who passed recently, told me about a job in the Washington, D.C. office. And that was for the governor's office in Washington. And I covered energy, environmental, natural resources issues and worked on the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, which was an amazing experience. But I also helped staff a National Governors Association's task force on climate change, which was 10 states, and Governor Jim Thompson was the chair. So that was my first kind of deep dive into climate issues. And that's also where I met Vicki Arroyo of Georgetown Climate Center, because she was then working for the Louisiana DEQ, and Governor Buddy Roemer was also on the task force. So
what was the feeling among these 10 states about climate change? I mean, I assume this was really way before it became politicized. What was the...
So it was a mix of states across the country, and the report ended up just saying, let's do no regrets policies, things that have other benefits, whether it's air quality. So they kind of took the safe route, but some of the states west of the Mississippi wanted to develop their resources, and some of the Northeast states didn't want them to. So Rich Carlson was the Illinois EPA director at the time, and he is masterful at dealing with a variety of perspectives in a room. So he did a great job.
And how else at that time was energy? And these days, energy is a huge climate issue, and energy policy is sort of inextricably woven with climate policy. But of course, that wasn't always the case. So what sorts of environmental concerns or issues did you come up against when dealing with energy policy?
Seems so long ago. I think that it developed over the years because then I went on to work for a petroleum company that was Amoco merged with BP, and BP had a very visible climate position. So I think it's been a kind of a continuum with some companies, just like some states, who are all in and see the benefits and the value of trying to decarbonize. So it's
So I'm interested similarly in understanding how the petroleum industry's views on climate change. You said that BP had a very defined view on climate. This would have been in the mid-late 90s, I'm assuming. So describe that and its relation to other petroleum companies at the same time.
I think companies that are based in Europe or the UK have been more progressive than some that are based elsewhere. But what was true then is true now. The companies are divided. They're trying to come together, and the American Petroleum Institute's working on a policy. But it really varies by the company, and so I'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough. So your careers intersected ultimately at the Commerce Commission, and I might be getting the dates slightly wrong, so correct me if I'm incorrect. But Anne, you were a commissioner at the Commerce Commission from 2012 to 2017, and Doug, you were chair there from 2011 to 2015.
Correct.
So you overlap for a good chunk there.
Yep.
So can you each talk a little bit about how your appointments came to be? So maybe starting with that. Maybe you could kick that off, Doug.
After Governor Quinn was reelected, Governor Blagojevich, of course, had been impeached and left office when I was still at the Illinois EPA. And I stayed on under Governor Quinn, who, as you know, has a really strong interest in energy and environmental issues. And so we would talk frequently about those things. When he was elected, I should say, in 2010, I got a call shortly after the election asking if I would consider moving from EPA head over to the commission, and that wasn't something I was expecting, and I was very much enjoying my work at EPA, but I did that, and I'm really glad I did. I mean, it was a great experience, and to have worked at both agencies at the level I did is really helpful now in understanding the intersection between energy and environment, which all too many places around the country is really siloed. Part of the work we do part of the work we do with Great Plains is bringing together groups of environmental and energy regulators, sometimes in the same state where they don't hardly talk to each other. And so it was really good to see these issues from the energy regulator side. So I moved over in, I think it was March of 2011, and was there until Governor Quinn left office in 2015.
And Anne, how did your appointment come about?
I had been on the Illinois Environmental Council Board for 9 years, and that's the umbrella group of the state's environmental groups. So, I knew a lot of the NGOs, and some of them came to me and said, we'd like to put your name forward to Governor Quinn for the Republican slot. And eventually I met with the governor, and that was that. But it's a two-step process. One's being appointed and one's being confirmed by the Senate. So,
and commissions in different states have different mandates. Can you just describe what the Illinois Commerce Commission covers in terms of sectors?
In Illinois, you regulate electric, gas, and water utilities, plus some transportation like tow trucks. But as far as the overarching statutory mission, you're supposed to balance the needs of the utilities and their shareholders with the needs of the consumers and the environment.
So can you guys sort of feel free, either one of you, to speak, or both of you, but what were the priorities of the commission during your overlapping time there? I know there were many, but putting on sort of a climate lens, maybe in particular.
Yeah, so it's interesting. As Ann said, some states will actually have an environmental mandate as part of the commission responsibilities. Most don't. Illinois doesn't. So it's not something where we were charged with looking at those issues. But I think most of us that were part of the commission during the years Ann and I served together were of a mind that those were really important issues. And so we would do things we would have hearings when we didn't have any docketed case in front of us to try to get out ahead of certain issues. So we would do things on renewable energy or on electric vehicles. Excuse me. I remember doing one actually not too long before I left that was specifically on clean power plan and climate type issues, because there are so many of the issues, even though environmental agencies and sometimes energy offices for the governors were handling those issues. There's so many issues that affect the energy sector. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing what we could to look at that. So that was, I'd say it was always there for us, but it would manifest itself in different ways. When you're looking at actual rate cases and things like that, you're fairly limited by both the record and the issues that are in front of you. So you can't really freelance and go out and try to set other policy, but you can bring those policy concerns up in other ways. And I think we tried to do that.
And I came on board right after legislation had been passed to modernize the grid and smart meters. And that was... It authorized $3.2 billion in both grid hardening as well as smart meter implementation. The first few years of implementing that, which was an annual process, it was basically doing smart grid by formula rate, was lively because we had interpretation issues over what some of the pieces of the legislation meant. So, but, years have passed. And ComEd, I think, has completed their smart meter implementation. Ameren will soon. And the grid itself is a lot smarter so that outages are fewer, shorter, fewer people are affected. And you have over 4 million smart meters installed that theoretically enable consumers to do more to manage their energy consumption and what they pay. In terms of demand response, time of use. Whether that's happening to the extent it should remains an open question to me.
The other thing that you always have to keep in mind at a commission is the decisions you make involve literally billions of dollars. They involve everybody in the state that are customers or people that are paying for the services. But there's also a Wall Street component to it. And so part of what you always want to make sure you're trying to do as a commission is make sure that you show kind of a steady hand. And if there are changes that you're going to want to make, if there are some significant changes in things like energy efficiency or other things, that you kind of signal those early on so that they have a chance to kind of vet. Because whether it's, and it goes back to what Ann said, about balancing the interests of the utilities and their ability to still deliver all that they need to do. And then we have to recognize that there's another world out there that's looking at the utilities and making decisions about how worthy a credit risk they are. And so, you try to keep all those things in mind while you're still doing the work that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, one of the key things that you have to balance is the sort of original mandate of delivering power with affordably and reliably,
right?
With sort of a new,
which is always the key,
which is always the key,
right.
And balancing that with new priorities like low emission,
right,
energy,
right. And any of the work that you see, we at Great Plains, we do lots of work now with commissions and with states that are looking at these issues. It always starts with reliability and affordability. That hasn't changed. But what has changed is, people are putting solar on the rooftops, and it's not just one set of generators sending it through their wires to the network that ends up in your houses. Now you've got all kinds of customers, like Ann said, making all kinds of choices. That's very different. So you have to figure out how the business model works
Yeah.
with all of the changes that are happening.
But does the threat of increased costs or unreliability, is that sometimes a red herring that industry uses to prevent encroachment on their business models?
Well, you want to start with that? It can be.
Yeah.
It can be. It's not always, but it certainly can be. You have the benefit from a distribution side in Illinois of understanding where all the dollars go and what that means in terms of cost to customers. With less control over the generation side because of that committee I was on way back 20 years ago.
Right.
We're now a deregulated state, and so some of the issues like when a polar vortex happens and people have to buy short-term gas that's really expensive. There's not a lot you can do about that. You have to understand that that's happening, but there's not that much you can do about that. So that, there's always that tension, and part of your role as a commissioner is to sort out what's real from what's not. And so, there's all these things, and the commissioners talk about, like, wow, when they forecast demand, they always forecast way high, and things like that you always hear. So that's your job as a commissioner, is to sort out what's real from what's not. But costs, you usually have a little bit better handle on. Liability is a little tougher because so many different kinds of things can happen to the network at any particular time. So it's
And you don't control those variables most of the time.
Much, right?
Yeah.
And now you have a lot of growth in renewables, which presents another set of issues in terms of intermittency and transmission needs, and how soon will storage be affordable and viable, and in what applications. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah.
So I want to focus on how we all know each other. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about our mutual alma mater, the Climate Registry. Doug, you hired me as executive director in 2011.
Mm-hmm. Very good choice.
Oh.
I'll just get it on the record here.
Thank you. Well, I was fishing for that compliment, but and you were then chair and served as chair. Well, I was there for a couple of years, and then when you rotated off the commission, it's, I guess, maybe important to say that the Climate Registry's board is supposed to be
State and provincial officials, right?
state and provincial officials that are gubernatorial appointees. So, Anne, you were still on the Illinois Commerce Commission, and you took Doug's role on the executive committee of the Climate Registry. So we had a chance to work together. And then you ended up succeeding me when I left the Climate Registry, and have been serving as a part-time executive director there for almost 2 years now.
Right.
So let's see, Doug, were you both there at the beginning of the Climate Registry?
I was a part-time employee at the outset, the Midwest Regional Director.
Right. So I know that the forming, or my understanding of it is that the forming meeting took place here in Chicago. Doug, you want to describe that a little bit?
Yeah, it was really pretty exciting. I mean, it was a huge meeting. I mean, there were a lot of people there. We had one of the hotel ballrooms here in Chicago, and Gina McCarthy was the head she was the chair of the board at that point. She was the environmental commissioner in Connecticut at the time, before she moved over to EPA. And we probably, I can't remember exactly, but a good number of states were involved in that at the beginning. And the idea, I learned a lot through my experience with the Climate Registry, but we had a solid number of states that were board members and stayed with a lot of those board members stayed with the process, have been in the process the whole time almost. Some of them just transitioned off recently, but so a very worthwhile enterprise, trying to figure out the right formulas and protocols to record, because climate, there are a lot of companies and there are a lot of states who are interested in keeping track of who is actually making reductions in carbon emissions, and so to keep track of that was very important. It's important to a lot of companies then and now in terms of their own branding, and and the image that they portray to their customers and their other companies. So it was a great idea, and I was very privileged to be there at the first meeting. Not understanding all of it, I'll freely admit, but picking it up as time went on.
Pretty technical, but I think
Right.
the gist of the reason that these states came together, as I understand it, and again, I wasn't there back then, was to create a single set of
Right.
protocols and
Right.
approaches to greenhouse gas measurement.
Right, exactly.
So, Ann, you are still at the helm of TCR. What is the main function and top priorities of the Climate Registry now?
Some of it's the same, and the Climate Registry was formed to create a high quality, transparent platform for voluntary greenhouse gas reporting. And the Climate Registry continues to tweak and improve that software model as well as the protocols underlying it. Along the way, for the last 10 years, the Climate Registry has co-led a delegation of state officials to the annual UN Climate Conference. And for the last 8 years, co-hosted a climate leadership and awards conference that was just in Baltimore. And we co-host that with C2ES, the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. And in more recent years, the Climate Registry has also been working on the water energy greenhouse gas nexus, developing metrics and guidance in Southern California, and now working on a statewide California water energy registry that will be launched late May.
And that measuring the greenhouse gas emissions implicit in water.
From extraction to delivery.
Yeah.
And water's regional, so it kind of varies where you are in terms of what the exact carbon footprint is.
Yeah, and important, particularly in California, where close to 20% of electric power is used in the water cycle. But nationally, I think that number is, what is the national number? Is it closer to 8 or 10%, I think.
Okay.
I could be getting that wrong.
Still significant.
It's still significant.
Jeez,
And so as companies and cities and others look to both conserve water and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, bringing those two together in a quantifiable way is important.
Right, absolutely.
So, Doug, you are now at the Great Plains Institute. Tell us a little bit, and you oversee, as I understand it, electricity and efficiency, and I know that you've also done work on carbon sequestration and storage.
Right.
Talk a little bit about what GPI is and what your priorities are there now.
We're a 20-year-old not-for-profit that's based in Minneapolis and working on energy and environmental solutions with a goal toward decarbonization. That's kind of our main umbrella goal. And then within that, we've got lots of different work going on in sectors, and you mentioned a few of them, from carbon capture and usage sequestration to helping states understand environmental laws and regulations, to working on things like the regional transmission organizations like PJM. We talked about their market rules and how they interface with some of the state objectives that are there. I do a lot of work on utility business models, some of the things that we were talking about with advanced meters and how the business model needs to adapt to really adapt to all of the changes that are happening in the energy delivery system. We do a lot on biofuels. We do a lot of work with individual cities on their sustainability goals and trying to help them. So pretty wide range of folks. We've got about 35 people that work for the Institute. And I had actually worked with them when I was a state official in Illinois on a number of different projects over the years, including talking about climate. After we had done our greenhouse gas plan back 2006 and 2007, we actually joined up with some other Midwestern states to work on what was called the Midwestern Governors Accord, which was a group of states trying to look at something like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, but with a Midwestern group of states. And we had 6 states and Manitoba, province of Manitoba, with us on that. And GPI actually facilitated that. So I got to know those folks during that process as well. So a good history with them. And so when transition happened in 2015, I actually got to keep working on and staffing committees that I had been on as a state official,
Right.
and chairing in one case. So that's a little different, but it was actually good because it gave me a nice transition. I got to keep working on things that were important.
So, and Doug and I, Dave Littell in Maine, I mean, there's a handful of former utility commissioners that had both energy and environmental experience, which was key during the Clean Power Plan. And Doug parlayed that also. I mean, he had stakeholder groups in the PJM region as well as MISO and brought together the environmental and the utility regulators. And a lot of them really hadn't interacted much before to better understand what each other did and what it was going to mean.
So, and just to define MISO as the Midwest Independent System.
Mid-continent independent. Because when they added Entergy in the southern states, then they rebranded to Mid-continent instead of Midwest.
Does it extend into Canada or not?
Well, actually, there are parts of Canada that are part of MISO, but it goes all the way in the states, all the way Montana, the Dakotas, all the way down to Louisiana. Yeah.
So the original Midwest Governors Accord,
Right.
As I understand it, looked at the potential for a carbon market. You mentioned looking at Reggie as a model.
And it was economy-wide, though. Unlike Reggie, which was just power sector, this was transportation also. So it was a lot of work that we put in over a period of years. But those principles are still out there today. You saw some of them when people were talking about the Clean Power Plan and trading ready kind of programs. That's really what you're talking about.
Is there any resurgence, do you think, now in 2019, any appetite, I should say, for a resurgence in talking about a regional carbon program of some kind?
We get asked that a lot. There are 4 governors in the Midwest who have made significant climate goals part of either their campaigns and or their new administrations. Governor Pritzker here, Governor Whitmer in Michigan, Governor Evers in Wisconsin, and Governor Walz in Minnesota. I think it's different than it was 10 years ago in a better way on one hand and in a worse way on another hand. On the worst side, I'll start with that. The legislatures are a little different. You mentioned early on about how political things have gotten. And so, other than Governor Pritzker here, who has supermajorities in both chambers, the other governors would have kind of a difficult time trying to move forward with that. You're seeing some of that now. Governor Evers has put his climate goal into his budget. That's running into some opposition. He may eventually get there, and Governor Whitmer has run into some similar issues as well. Governor Walz now the Minnesota legislature is the only legislature in the country that's split, that has one house that's headed by Republicans and one by Democrats. So that's a little different than it was when Governor Doyle and Governor Pawlenty in Minnesota and Governor Granholm in Minnesota and the governors Sebelius in Kansas and Culver in Iowa, the governors that were part of that accord. So that's a little different. On the plus side, what I will say is there's a huge difference in terms of how utilities view this issue now than they did 10 years ago. And so you're seeing Xcel Energy say we're going to be 100% carbon neutral by 2050. And we're seeing that out of DTE in Michigan, Consumers Energy in Michigan, Mid-America over in Iowa is doing, and we've always had companies like Exelon here and in several states that supports that. That's very different than it was 10 years ago. And that will help drive policy toward that. In addition, a lot of companies and consumers are looking at this differently than they did before. We talked about that a little bit earlier as well. The rush toward whether it's rooftop solar, electric vehicles, lots of whole house kind of smart energy programs. That's very different than it was 10 years ago too. And so I get a little more hopeful that there's some of these aspirations can come true and will just because there's a lot more people rowing that boat in the same direction.
And there's one other opportunity, and that's at the regional transmission organization level. And PJM just put forward a problem statement and issue charge for a carbon price. and that will begin a process. And, theoretically, a subset of the PJM states could move forward to incorporate a carbon price. So it'll be interesting to watch that.
Very interesting. So another thing that's afoot in Illinois is the implementation of the Future Energy Jobs Act of 2016. And there's new legislation afoot that extends the target reduction to, I believe, people are talking about 100% renewable energy at some point in the future, maybe 2050, similar goal to what California has adopted. How do you guys see the implementation of the Future Energy Jobs Act and the viability of this sort of really aggressive 100% type goal or mandate coming about?
I think the CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, that's being considered now, along with a number of competing bills in Springfield, in part addresses some of the issues they ran into implementing the Future Energy Jobs Act that passed December 2016. Yes. So it fixed some things, and then it also expands the renewable portfolio goals. So,
what were some of the flaws in the design of the first bill that are leading to trouble in implementation?
I know there were issues with the renewable portfolio standard, the RPS, and it had to do with the RECs and everything else. But so it would address that, so it's easier.
They're fairly complicated, but they were more technical than they were policy kind of issues. So things that you would normally go back and change. I mean, I think the idea that and the governor's talked about 100% clean energy, which may not necessarily be renewables.
Right.
We've seen some other governors and some of the other utilities we talked about.
California as well.
Yeah, talking about, so that may involve nuclear energy, that may involve carbon capture technology as well. Don't know. We haven't, none of the states that we mentioned a minute ago has gone through a process yet to try to figure out what how they're going to pursue those goals. But I expect that to be coming. The other part of FEJA and now CEJA too is looking at the nuclear plants in Illinois, and that's a big part of that, and not, my own opinion, not necessarily done only for clean energy goals. There are a lot of that had to do with the jobs of the nuclear plants and where they're located and what they mean for tax base for their local communities. Those are all very valid concerns for a legislature. But I think as time goes on, we're going to start to see more and more questions about the amount of money that's put in. And I happen to be a supporter of nuclear energy, but the amount of money that's put in there, both here in Illinois and in other states, and is that the place to use money, or is it going to be to help build up something else that might get you to that 100% clean energy goal? Those discussions will go on in lots of different states, not just in Illinois in the next few years. And we've also seen some significant issues because of those legislative initiatives that end up at the RTO level too. Because if people are bidding power into the system, one of the things that PJM's been wrestling with, for example, is how do we account for that? If you're getting a subsidy to produce your energy, how do we account for that in a bidding process that's supposed to be fuel neutral? How do we account for that? There's no easy answer to that, tricky. And so that's leading to some fairly heightened tensions between the states and who want to and probably always will continue to pursue whatever initiatives they think are in the best interest of their state. Versus the regional market that's trying to figure out how to balance power demand with load. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the jobs outlook in terms of clean energy jobs now. I have some stats that I'll be able to share with those who are interested in the show notes for this episode. But where do you see the main thrust of job creation in the clean energy sector happening in Illinois and maybe more broadly in the Midwest now, and where do you see that evolving over the next couple of years?
Well, with the renewable portfolio standards, and a lot of states are increasing those, and with the drop in prices of renewables, I think there's a lot of opportunities depending where you live in the renewables area, and storage is becoming more viable. So there's some opportunities there, and hopefully there'll continue to be opportunities on the energy efficiency front because we haven't reaped all those benefits yet.
Yeah, I think energy efficiency is the kind of the real load there. Wind farms don't they create short-term construction jobs, which are great, but not in terms of long-term larger solar installations. Kind of the same thing. But I really think energy efficiency is a place where we could really see that's where a lot of the jobs are right now. That's where they've grown.
Construction and trade related jobs. I think right now it's over 70% of the clean energy jobs, at least as E2 counts them.
Yeah.
And
RNE.
RNE.
Yeah, I think that'll continue. I mean, we looked at large programs here in terms of doing installation and retrofits of existing buildings, those kinds of jobs. Those are the kinds of things, as you look at trying to decarbonize the building sector, especially in a big city, like Chicago. So much of the energy footprint is in the building sector. Figuring out how to reduce that, I think it's going to lead to a lot more clean energy jobs in the future. And I think you can do that in a way that economically is going to make sense for customers. I think we found that through EE programs here in the state. I think we'll continue to see that.
And I think a lot of the cities, in addition to looking at electrifying transportation, they're looking at building energy efficiency and how to incent that.
What about on the policy front? And I know that you're still involved pretty heavily with the Harris School. Are there, obviously, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of policy jobs, but are there opportunities for people that are interested either perhaps in the legal side or in the straight policy side of clean energy and climate and environment?
Yes, and I'd have to talk to the career counseling office to see how well the students are doing, but there are definitely opportunities, and it kind of depends on the students' mix of skills. The school is a lot more quantitative than when I went there, and the students have a lot of good quantitative as well as research and analytics skills. So I think it just depends on what sector and type of organization they're targeting.
So as you guys talk to people that are interested in doing sustainability work, and obviously doing building retrofitting is very different than doing policy work, but the feedback that I'm getting in talking to, in particular, just to young people in general, but in particular to college career departments, where the interest is high, but sort of unspecific in what sort of jobs are out there and how to make an impact. What advice do you have to give to young people that are interested in saving the planet?
I always recommend internships and volunteering while they're in school, and that gives a basis for the future and may also help them determine what they're really interested in.
I think, too, that, I think that's a great suggestion. And I think part of the reason that's a great suggestion is it's not just governments anymore. We talked about utilities and companies looking at these issues very differently. And I know quite a few people who have moved over into utilities working specifically on these areas, which probably didn't exist for the utility 10 years ago, working on not just sustainability, but, how do we do greenhouse gas reduction? A utility like Xcel, who wants to, has 100% clean energy goal, is going to need a lot of people to try to figure out what's the best way to make that work. And I think both from a utility and another corporate structure who are interested, there's a lot more jobs looking at sustainability issues than there ever was before. So I think that's another area where it's, and governments will always be looking at that, and that's a great place to look too.
Yeah, by our count, there's close to 5 million.
Yeah.
So in the straight clean energy, renewables and energy efficiency, it's around 3.5 million. But when you include corporate sustainability, you include policy and nonprofit work, the number gets up there. The challenge is that they're diffuse and they're a little bit hard to find. They're in a lot of pockets.
Yeah. But like everything else, I think Ann's right. Talk to talk to people who do that kind of thing. We hear a lot about people who are embarking in different areas now that are going to need some folks to help them with that. So, and we see a lot of people who, when we're hiring, we see a lot of people who through school have been doing internships and have been doing the kinds of things Ann suggested. And I think that's a great way to figure out what's out there and learn from it.
So just as we start to wrap up, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit. Now, both of you obviously have great expertise in Illinois, but you also have both done a lot of work with groups of states. The Climate Registry being one case. Doug, you're doing a lot of this work now.
Right.
And you chaired a nuclear subcommittee at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and have been involved in a number of other state groups. At a time when the federal government is slow to act or might be retrograde in its action around climate issues, we sort of look to private sector and we look to states. How robust is the ability of states or groups of states to actually affect climate outcomes?
We have some groups like Rhodium and others who have been analyzing the progress of the voluntary efforts of states and companies in meeting the Paris Agreement goals. And depending which report you look at, you hear slightly different things. But I think that states, companies, and NGOs that are engaged are making a difference and going up that curve. But there's still more to be done.
Yeah, I do think states and groups of states can make a big difference. I mean, if you look at the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, where they've had significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, not negatively affected their economy there, and have been able to function and make that work. I think that's a good example for others. You've got two states that are poised to join RGGI also coming up soon. And I think you may also see as states start digging into this, how do we get to our Paris goals or our 100% clean energy goals? I think you're going to start to see a lot of cooperation between states too, because, the electrons don't know what state they're in, when they're moving. And so there's a lot of cooperation that's needed on a regional basis. And I think that can do a lot, and technology will do a lot, probably in advance of regulatory lag that's out there. But having a federal policy still makes a huge difference. I mean, I think the difference between having something in place, and I know a lot of states didn't like this, and we worked with a lot that liked it and a lot that didn't, but something like a clean power plan to kind of both set a nationwide goal of what we're trying to achieve and the reductions, and the ability as technology gets better and as people get better about dealing with those issues, then to ratchet down the amount of greenhouse gas reductions, or ratchet up the reductions. I think a federal policy like that helps drive it in a way states just can't. But states can, and local governments can do a whole lot on their own.
So I started as the interim executive director of the Climate Registry on June 1st, 2017, which was the same day the president made his announcement about withdrawing from the Paris Agreement.
Welcome to the new job.
Yes. So, but what also formed at that time was the U.S. Climate Alliance of Governors, which is now over 23 governors, and they have a number of work groups. And so they are helping each other on things like short-lived climate pollutants, land use, electrification. You have the Transportation Climate Initiative in kind of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast states. So I think there's a number of venues and groups where the states are sharing best practices and helping each other.
And then that in turn, when enough states get involved and start doing things like that in turn has a big influence on federal policy too.
Right. So maybe to close with, again, kind of broadening this, and not to end on a negative note, but there is a lot of criticism, especially from the young generation, that we just have dropped the ball, right? The scientific consensus is that we're nearly out of time. to reverse our current heading. We have 11 years left, and there's not real evidence that our emissions trend is starting to plateau globally, although it has to some extent in the U.S. What is the most important thing we can do in our fight to save the planet? And do you believe that we can do it?
I think some of it's just continuing to do what we're doing and hoping for greater collective and national action.
Yeah, I think showing that what you can now, that you can make significant reductions and not harm the economy. It's been a false choice that's been out there forever. If you believe in the environment or you believe in spurring the economy, well, it's not an either or. You can grow the economy and protect the environment at the same time. The more we start to see examples of that, so the most important thing is just keeping going, keeping doing things. States, if that's where it has to be, states and local governments just keep doing things, because the as we talked about, the attitudes toward climate change have changed. The more the public not only understands it, but thinks that there's something that needs to be done. And the more you can see you can do that in a cost-effective way that also benefits the environment, I think that's going to spur more people to act.
So the second part of that question is, can we do it?
Yes, of course.
I guess we wouldn't be doing the work if
That's right.
if we thought it was
That's right.
a failure. Well, Ian McCabe and Doug Scott, it's great to see you both. Thanks for your
You
time.
too. Thanks.
And
Thanks, David.
thanks for all the great work that you do.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
The Sustainability Leaders Podcast is a resource of Jobs with Impact. Our engineer and associate producer is Ian Swanky. Theme music also by Ian Swanky. I'm David Rosenheim. If you like the show, please tell your friends and give us a rating and review on iTunes. See you next episode.